And it really wasn't until I met Casey and he found keto to start that we began doing higher fat, more emphasis on protein, and cleaner sources of carbs at the time, which were just avoiding grains mostly. And from that, it sort of evolved into this crazy thing called carnivore that I had never heard of. And it wasn't until I went mostly meat based that my body started to heal.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our videos. If you'd like to support us some more, you can explore our homemade natural skincare products at purelytallow.com. Thank you so much for supporting my small business. Hey everybody, welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm your host, Serena, and my guest today is Bethany Ruff. Bethany is a personal trainer. She teaches Pilates, and she is the co-host of the very popular Boundless Body podcast with her husband, Casey, who is just hands down one of my favorite people to have on my channel. He is so awesome. So I'm so glad you could join me today and we could get some information from you too.
I'm so excited. It's long overdue.
I know it really is. We talk like through Casey sometimes and we talk a lot
Right.
like on Facebook and Instagram, but this face-to-face thing is a first. So I'm really excited about it.
Same here.
So let's start with your history. I like to start with people's story so that, you know, the people that are listening or watching can see if it resonates with them. So let's start with your history and how you ended up on this crazy low carb journey.
Yeah, so it actually dates pretty far back. I remember starting to be body conscious around the age of 8. I kind of grew up in a family where we were Air Force, so we moved around a ton, and my parents, just being very busy people, tended to show more like validation through athletic achievements, things that we did well at school. And I started to get positive comments from them and teachers and friends when I would perform better in sports. And one particular summer around age 9, where I actually took up running and biking and swimming and had lost quite a bit of weight, an unhealthy amount. And unfortunately, that kind of kicked off disordered eating that I struggled with the majority of my life. In After college, in my early 20s, I actually checked myself into inpatient at the Melrose Institute in Minnesota for anorexia. And my mindset was just always on my value being tied to how thin I was and always chasing that, wanting to be skinnier and wanting to fit into a smaller clothes size. And it wasn't until I started personal training with a coach and heavy lifting that I started to like look over at the girl on the lifting block next to me and see how strong she was and see how much weight she could pick up. And it kind of reframed what I thought was really cool. And so I wanted to chase becoming more muscular than being thin. And obviously you can't do that if you're not eating. So I did the high carb thing. I did standard American diet. I followed all the advice of get plenty of vegetables and fiber, and I had the worst gut issues. I probably had more endoscopies and colonoscopies by the time I was 22 than your average grandparent. And I was diagnosed with potentially IBS, potentially Crohn's disease. They gave me a diagnosis for celiacs. And so I was doing the whole gluten-free thing, which, as anybody knows, you can still get away with eating really poorly, even if you are avoiding wheat. So I was so sick and I struggled and just felt inflamed and I wasn't comfortable living in my own body. And it really wasn't until I met Casey and he found keto to start that we began doing higher fat, more emphasis on protein, and cleaner sources of carbs at the time, which were just avoiding grains mostly. And from that, it sort of evolved into this crazy thing called carnivore that I had never heard of. And it wasn't until I went mostly meat based that my body started to heal. And I never thought that I would be thriving eating 95% meat and no carbohydrates. But I've been on carnivore now for about 5 years and I've never felt better, mental clarity, physically. Just it's amazing how you can even take some time away from lifting and still maintain the muscle mass. So I will never go back. That's just kind of a synopsis of how I found it, but I absolutely love it and swear by it.
So when you first heard about carnivore, did you think like, this is insane? I mean, I think most,
Absolutely.
yeah, most of us go through this period before we start like, should I try it? Like you hear all of these success stories, you see all these things, and then you're just like, I don't know, like surely they're not all lying, right? I mean, what was that like for you, that moment
Yeah.
of like how desperate you had to be to try something so outrageous?
Yeah, definitely at a very, very low point. And I just at that stage of my life was like, I will try whatever I need to try. And it's almost like you said, like this like secret thing you don't want to like admit to people. And I remember going in a break room at work and I would eat like my ground beef without being around people because especially as a female in this space, it's kind of looked down upon and it's weird to order tons of meat or like big steaks or big double burgers in restaurants because you get comments from people like, man, she can eat. That's one that I've heard a ton. And so, yeah, it felt shameful at first. And again, like it still kind of blows my mind that the one food group, whether I'm traveling or out of the country or don't have consistency in my life, the one food group that I will not have a reaction to is meat.
So interesting because I'm like you, I had tried every diet possible, even gluten-free junk food is still junk food. And I've been gluten-free, I don't know, 13 years, I think. And I've eaten my share of gluten-free junk food. But anytime I've ever been on a different diet or a way of life, usually a diet, I had a hard time eating other places, right? Like, we'd be going out to eat, and I'd be
Mhm.
nervous. I'd be looking at the menu on the computer before we left the house, before we had, computers in our pockets. And then once we got smartphones, I would be, like, scouring the internet for what meal I can get at this restaurant that's gonna fit in with whatever I'm doing, whether it was Weight Watchers or counting calories or dairy free or vegan or plant-based or paleo, like whatever it was I was doing, I would be like frantic trying to figure out what I'm going to get before I get there so I don't have to make a spectacle, so I don't have to ask a lot of questions, so I don't have to ask for a special menu, but I always had to ask for a special menu and I always had to ask for special things. And now I'm like, I'll just have the burger with no bun. Like,
Yeah.
and
And
can
they
you
don't
double
know how to
that?
do it.
Huh?
They don't know how to do it. They will
Yeah.
still bring you the bun or they will just like we've had the craziest experience in restaurants where they come back and they like the lettuce is wrapped around it or next to it or something. They just can't help themselves.
I
It's just
can't.
such a foreign idea that someone would just want the meat.
Yeah, and when when we only eat the meat, like, I just chuckle when they do as long as it hasn't ruined my burger, like, if they've gone ahead and put the sauce on it or something, that I'm not gonna eat, but I very rarely ever have to send something back. I mean, I used to seem like the pickiest eater when I really wasn't picky, I was just trying to follow my stinking plan, and now it's so easy. Everywhere we go, I mean, I don't go to many vegans. I don't have, like, a lot of friends that are vegan, and so I'm not, like, going to friends' parties where there's no meat, so everywhere we go, there is, cheese or, some sort of a platter, an appetizer platter with pepperoni and stuff on it, or we're having hamburgers, and I've done like, if I need to, I've done like a meat sauce spaghetti without the noodles, on occasion if I have to, just to be able to eat with,
Mhm.
whoever we're with. I don't do that very often. And I don't really notice a big problem when I do, but I do it very, very seldom. But just in general, there are very few places. I don't think anywhere in the last more than 3 years have I gone where there was nothing for me to eat. Do you feel like that too? Like this is just super easy.
Yeah, Casey and I mention it all the time, and especially when we start working with people and they are overwhelmed, like they have all these goals, that they want to lose weight, they want to take up strength training, they want to change their diet, and everyone is so focused, especially with in Utah, it's the land of multi-level marketing, and there's on every corner a meal prep service. You never have to put any thought into it. Really, we do mass grocery shopping at Sam's or Costco. We get all the meat that we're going to need for the week. Lately, my kick has been brisket. We bought a vacuum sealer and a sous vide, and we just get all of our meat. We portion it up into the pound or pound and a half we're going to eat for the day, vacuum seal it up. So we've never put less mental energy into
Yeah.
grocery shopping, meal prepping, if you will, which is really just, heating up or cooking your meat. And
Mm.
it's all I crave. Again, it still shocks me that I am not sick of steak. I'm not sick of brisket, ground beef. Red meat seems to be the safest for us. I will rotate in some amount of chicken, or I like fish a lot more than Casey does. So I'll kind of go through waves of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's so seamless for us. We love it.
Yeah, so funny. Like I do the same thing. We go to, Sam's and Walmart for us, and I load up on meat, and people will say, Aren't your groceries more expensive?" But I find that they're actually a lot less expensive. Do you guys find that too?
Absolutely. I mean, the price per pound, especially if you're considering the nutrient density in something like an egg or a stick of butter or like you do, sardines that I have not been brave enough to try yet, but I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there. But yeah, we absolutely love it. And to be honest, like I remember our grocery bills being a lot higher before, and so much of,
Mhm.
especially when you're buying the produce, would get shoved to the back of the refrigerator, and that's
Yes.
where it would go to die. And you'd have all
Yep.
these grand plans of making it, but you're wasting money, and then you're wasting it on the organic stuff that you think that you're supposed to buy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been so easy for us.
Yeah, that's so true. And I remember going to the grocery store, like you said, you don't have to put a lot of mental work into this. And I agree with that. I used to go to the grocery store like with a clipboard, like I had a spreadsheet with the items that I bought every time so that I would know, like that was my grocery list. That was my standard grocery list was on the computer. We have 4 children. So it helped to be that organized. Now my whole
Mhm.
family isn't carnivore. And so we do still buy those other things, but that's their responsibility. I make sure we have the meat, and if the kids want something that I don't normally have in the house or that I'm not planning on making as part of dinner or something, they add that to the list, where they put that in our online cart, for when I go pick up the groceries. And so
Mhm.
that really helps. But I do think that, like, for most people, it's going to be less expensive. I figured it out one day last week or the week before. If I just ate, like, people, I remember everybody complaining about the price of eggs recently going up, but they're still very inexpensive for what you get. And the same people that complain about the eggs are spending, a meal at a restaurant now, like Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, they're
Mhm.
like $12 for a meal these days. Maybe
Mhm.
it's not that expensive at McDonald's, but Five Guys is super expensive. Like all of these
Mhm.
places, the prices are just astronomical now for these
Mhm.
meals, but you could eat 6, 8, 10 eggs and then have some cheap ground beef later on in the day. You're going to be at like $8 or $10 for one
Yeah.
meal. And
Yeah.
so the complaining about the price of meat and how expensive is your grocery budget is just, it's out of line because it's wrong.
Yeah, especially considering that now with people door dashing and Grubhubbing, I mean, that's an easy $30 to $50 a meal if you're ordering for the whole family, which is just crazy to me. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Before we move on from that, we always talk about moderators and abstainers, and I
Yeah.
feel like it would be so hard for me to live in a house where there was non-carnivore foods, because I would love to say I'm a robot and the other stuff doesn't sound or look good. I'm not at that point yet, so I'm not the type of person who could have a little bit and then put it away in the pantry. Is that hard for you to have like the temptation around?
Most of the time, no, because that's not food to me. Like, I really
Ah.
just don't even think about it. And I am an abstainer through and through. And I'll be honest, over the weekend, a company sent me some delicious chips. Have you seen the masa chips?
I haven't, no.
Masa tortilla chips? They are so good. I wish I hadn't tasted it. That's for sure. My family loves them though. But they are tortilla chips, non-GMO, like, real natural corn chips that are fried in beef tallow. They are
Oh,
they are delicious. The ones they sent me are churro flavored, so they're like sweet. They have powdered sugar and some cinnamon.
dangerous.
I did taste them. It was very dangerous for me. I think my husband's downstairs eating a bag right now. They love them, and so they're very, very good. So something like that is a little bit harder for me than like actual junk food. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, because that in my head is so much better. It's almost like giving myself permission to
Yeah.
eat something like that. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, definitely.
because it's better, I feel like it's not so bad. So I ate a couple to try it, and I had to say, like, somebody take these away from me, you know?
Yeah.
So that's the only time it's hard is if I find something that almost seems acceptable,
Mhm.
it's hard for me to not eat it,
Yeah.
in that case. But other than that, and even then, I find that I can resist it usually. So it is a little bit harder for me than it would be if there was just meat in the refrigerator. So
Yeah.
I probably dabble in a few things, like it would be a lot easier for me to avoid things like a sugar-free sauce on occasion or something like that if we
Mhm.
didn't already have it in the house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On occasion, I'll use, I would say, maybe half a teaspoon of sugar-free ketchup on my burger just because
Mhm.
everybody else is doing it. I'm like, oh, well, I do miss the taste of
Yeah.
ketchup, and I'll just half a teaspoon isn't going to hurt me. But if I
Mhm.
allow myself to have that, suddenly that becomes an okay food. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they sneak in so creepily. I have to be
They
careful
do.
with the same thing. The
Mhm.
best strategy I have is just not let it in my house, not let it in my
Okay.
shopping cart.
Yeah. So I think even once our kids are all gone, I think we will still have some of those foods in the house. We're going to have grandkids and our kids are going to come and visit. So I think, well,
Yeah.
so I have to learn. I have to learn how to just say no, or I have to decide half a teaspoon of sugar-free ketchup on a burger is okay, and
Yeah.
just and not beat myself up over it. It's half a teaspoon. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, a half a teaspoon probably isn't going to hurt me. So,
Right.
at some point I'll have to, kind of make that decision. I do find that it's easier for me to let things creep in if things are already creeping in.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So, what did your family and friends think when you guys said, so this is all we're going to eat now?
Whew, we have a lot of unsolicited opinions. We've had to kind of like sit down with people, especially, the more we go and like visit with family, which is just a once a year trip. And I always have to prep my mom beforehand. Like, I understand this is unconventional. It's different. It's not what you guys are used to. All we ask is that we don't get berated about it. We're going to go and stop at the grocery store when we come into town and we load up on ground beef and burger patties, beef jerky. My treat sometimes is dairy. I try to avoid that for the most part, but I can still have it occasionally. We eat a lot more eggs than anybody else would for breakfast, so we'll buy several dozen eggs. I mean, especially at the rate Casey eats them. So yeah, it just needs to be like out in the open, but also something where it's not like judged upon. So we've gone
Mhm.
through some hard experiences with that. We are personally trying to start a family, and I've had a lot of comments from especially the men in the family saying, there's no way you can have a fertile body if you need to eat carbs, you need to have vegetables, you need all the colors of the rainbow in your diet. And at one point of my life I did believe that, but I can confirm that's not what makes my system run the best and what makes me feel the best. So yeah, there's not a lot of balance with it, and it's hard, especially when we were there over the 4th, to have cut up watermelon at the table and see biscuits and pancakes and waffles sitting out on the table for breakfast. Again, I'm not a robot. It looks really good, but I know myself, and I know as soon as my mouth tastes that sweet, whether it's coming
Mhm.
from a natural source, fruit, or something that's processed, it doesn't discriminate, and I will crave and crave and crave. So I just can't go down that pathway personally. So staying full and satiated for me, definitely no restricting anymore these days, but just filling up on the good stuff. My strategy before I go see friends, or if we're going to go to a client's house for dinner or something, knowing most people don't eat carnivore, is to go in relatively full so that it's not something that I have to worry about when I'm there.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, when I'm at, a thing like that, like we were just at a big family, cookout on Saturday, and everybody's getting all the stuff, right? And I'm not tempted then. It's really funny. Like for me, I'm not tempted by any of that stuff because I need to be the example. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
if I do that, they're gonna be thinking, "Oh, so she does eat other foods," or so I
Yeah.
actually feel like I'm more strict in that kind of a situation than I am just here at home with my family. But, like, my kids saw me eating a couple of those chips yesterday to taste them, and they were like, "What are you doing? Why are you eating that?" Like, they call me on it, like, even though they don't eat like I do, they know that I want to eat this way, and so if they see me
Yeah.
doing something like that, they do call me on it, and if I ever blow it off like I did at Christmas time, I'm always sorry. Like, Christmas time was bad, 4 or 5 days of just all out
Yeah.
binging for me, boxes of chocolate covered cherries and all kinds of stuff. It was a terrible few days, for me, and they called me on it, and I was like, "Oh, it's just," I made excuses like I used to do
Yeah.
when I had eating disorders and disordered eating. I would make excuses on a binge day,
Right.
so that's hard because I did manage to make excuses, and then it was just okay. It was like they accepted it because I made the proper excuse. I made it look like it was okay even though it wasn't, and so
Yeah.
anyway, but I'm better when I'm out than I am when I'm home, probably, I think.
That's
So
interesting. I'm kind of envious of that. I feel like, oh, I'm seeing everybody else do it. I want to jump in that. And it used to be like I knew my body would really feel terrible, my digestion, bloating, all of that kind of stuff, skin issues. But what I've really realized, I think I gave myself the last little green flag to eat Christmas cookies probably 3 years ago. My mom's like homemade. I hadn't had them since I was a kid. I'm like, I'm just gonna enjoy these. The anxiety, oh my gosh, the mental that I felt after that. It was just a prison in my own mind for like
yes.
days and days. And that I'll remember forever.
Yeah, I've talked about this a few times. I may have mentioned it when I was talking to Casey on our last interview. The kids and I were watching a show about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and, it was like one of those drama, it was like, on Hallmark Channel. It was one of those,
Oh yeah.
and it was a series that we were watching, and in one of them, one of the people has a drug addiction, and somebody says to them, "Addiction is the only prison where the lock is on the inside." And
Mm,
to me, that just blew my mind. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that is so true." It literally because only you can open it,
exactly.
Only you can open up that prison and let yourself out. So I think about that
Yeah.
all the time, just because that's such a real, like I got goosebumps when he said it and I immediately went to the kitchen and got a notepad and wrote it down. I was like, I need to remember this because when
Hmm.
I am struggling, that's one of the things that I really need to remember.
Yeah, it's hard when your family too knows like your history. For me, it sounds like you have had a history of disordered eating in the
Yeah.
opposite realm of binging. With anorexia, my parents at first were like, "Oh gosh, she's going down the rabbit hole of that again because she's only eating this one food group. It's coming back." But in reality, it's been the safest and easiest way for me to transition my healing process because it's a way I still have control, but in a healthy way where I'm still nourishing my body.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to sardines,
Yes.
only because you mentioned them.
Yes.
So what I have found, because I was pretty grossed out by them for about a year and a half, I ate the Wild Planet ones covered in mustard, and I would eat
Okay.
them 60 seconds, like literally, like four bites. I would just about swallow them whole. Like it was all I could do to get them down. But I did it about once a week because Kelly Hogan told me to. No, because Kelly was doing it, and she is such a great example to us, on what we should eat. She eats so healthy. Even as far as carnivores go, she does such a great job, and I believe her, and I believe Dr. Boz that sardines are really good for us, and I've done the research, and so I wanted to eat them like once a week. And then when I started kind of sardine fasting since like maybe April, off and on, I've been doing a bunch of sardine fasting. And I've tried multiple different brands. And the one that I have found that's the best was also recommended by Kelly through Courtney Luna. And I've talked to Kelly about it since. These are the absolute best ones. They don't have the skin or the bone, so you don't have as much nutrition in them, but they're also less gross and they're less fishy.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
the King Oscar in the red can in olive oil, you can dump the olive oil or you can use the olive oil, or you can get them in water. But I have found that they're softer for some reason if they're in the olive oil. And I'll dump out the oil and I'll put them on a plate and use a little bit of avocado oil mayonnaise, or I'll make my own mayonnaise, or I'll use a little bit of mustard. But they're not nearly as fishy. And once you mash them up, if you use like a little bit of mayonnaise in them, it tastes just like tuna fish.
Okay.
So I don't know if that'll help you or not, but if you
Yeah,
just tell
I'll give it a
yourself,
try.
yeah, I mean, it's in our heads. It's that sardines are gross. We just think sardines are gross, but they really do feel and taste just like tuna fish. If you can try those, I think you'll be able to eat them.
Do you find that doing those kinds of fasts, like why particularly sardines versus like actual tuna or another kind of fish?
Dr. Boz, it's the sardines have the least amount of mercury in them because they don't eat other fish because they're so small. And so they have the least amount of mercury in them. And it's actually very safe to eat sardines multiple times a day for a week or more. I think Dr. Boz, one of her patients did a 30-day sardine fast, and she has a patient right now that's on like day 72 or something. She just had her blood work done, but the results haven't come back yet. So it's very interesting. I can tell you for sure, without a doubt, that with sardine fasting, my ketones go higher and my glucose goes lower than when I water fast.
Interesting.
Very interesting. On a regular carnivore, my ketones tend to be less than 1 on any given day, or right around 1. It's
Uh-huh.
very rare that it goes a lot higher than that, unless I'm really tracking my calories and my macros and I'm doing high fat, like 85, 90, 95% fat, which is almost unsustainable. That is very difficult to do. I could do it if I had to, if I was, trying to cure cancer or, whatever. I could do it if I was trying to get rid of my cancer, I could do it. But it's almost unsustainable for me. It's not fun at all. So I can get my ketones up really high if I do that. But sardine fasting is just easier. 3 or 4 cans a day, probably 4. You might need 5. You're younger than me. Like, you should try to get your calories in with sardines instead of under eating the whole time. And I've
Mm-hmm.
experimented with both ways, lost the
Hmm.
exact same amount of weight with more calories. And with the macros being the same, like 75, 25, I actually lost the same amount of weight eating more as I did eating less sardines. Really
Fascinating.
interesting. Yeah. So then I did breakfast and lunch and ate
Mhm.
just like a steak for dinner. And my ketones went up and my glucose went down, even having that steak for dinner. But there's something about the sardines, maybe it's the omega 3s, I don't know. I just talked to Dr. Boz
Interesting.
about it last week, and she doesn't know what it is either. But I think it's probably the omega threes. Day 3 is where you feel like euphoric. So if you can get yourself to a
Wow.
3 day, but day 4 is where the numbers are amazing. Like I actually had to quit a day early, the last one, because my glucose went down to 47.
Wow. I was gonna ask what your glucose numbers were.
Yeah, and my ketones were 5.6 that day.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I know. So I did quit a day early that time because I knew I wasn't feeling right. And I had been testing every day anyway because I was documenting it. But that was the lowest my glucose has gone. And that wasn't
Wow.
healthy. And it probably would have gone up high enough if I'd have just eaten a can of sardines. But I was feeling kind of done anyway. It was my last day. And I was like, I'm just going to break this fast now because I knew
Hmm.
I wasn't feeling 100%. But just in general, the sardines are just such a powerhouse. And they're very filling too. Like one can of sardines kind of keeps me full all day if I don't push it. Like I could
Interesting.
honestly eat one can and not even need anything else. So give it a try. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
I
like
mean,
them.
I don't really mind a fishy fish either. I
Oh
think for
yeah.
me, it's more the texture thing.
Yeah.
Like knowing I'm eating bones or scales or a tail or
Yes.
eyeballs or something, like just
Yeah.
that part. If I don't think about it, I think I'd be fine.
Yeah. So even the other ones that do have the skin and the bones, they do not have the tail or the head.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
We're making moves here.
Right. We're making progress here. And you do get more nutrients from those, but the nutrients from the ones without the skin and the bones is still really good. So like
Okay.
yeah. So give it a try,
I love
report
it.
back. Let me know.
Of course.
Okay. So excluding sardines, of course, what does a normal day of eating look like for you right now?
Yeah, so actually the last couple of weeks it's evolved just a little bit.
Mhm.
I have trained myself. I said I've been carnivore for about 5 years. In that time, I have definitely messed my hormones up just a little bit. I think I was overexerting between strength training,
Okay.
hiking, walking, just being too active, not
Mhm.
getting enough calories. Casey always gets on me. He's like, I think you're going too high of protein and not high enough fat.
Yeah.
So I was doing zero carb and I actually lost my cycle for about a year and a
Oh
half. So I
no.
did a little functional nutritional therapy and had to stop relatively quickly because all that was being advised to me was to increase carbohydrate. And I don't thrive on that. I don't feel
Right.
great. I did give it a try, and it was clean, washed white rice, excuse me, oats and blueberries. And I had joint pain. I had brain fog. I was emotional. I just was not my best self at all. So I had to ditch that. So a normal day of eating for me now, I've tried my best to not do extended fasts. I was doing, or not extended fast, but I was fasting every day for between 20 and 22 hours. So I would have about a 2 hour eating window, and that also lined up with about an hour before I would go to bed. And I was noticing I was waking up multiple times in the night to pee, which I believe is a cortisol imbalance issue.
Mhm.
So a lot of signs pointing to that my body was just overstressed. I also found that I was mentally just wanting my day to be over so I could get to that meal or get to that like relaxation period. That was the only thing that felt like it was bringing me back to a base level. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I started doing very small dinners and actually starting to eat first thing in the morning when I woke up after about a 14-hour fast, and then lunch as well. So a normal day of eating for me now, I'll rotate my protein. Sometimes I really love raw salmon, so I'll do anywhere between 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat, wherever that's coming from. I really enjoy just how simple ground beef is. Casey's the cook of the house, so he'll make me a brisket a week that will usually vacuum seal up, and that will last me a while. I'll rotate in filet mignon. I have really expensive taste in steak, unfortunately for me. So we'll do a lot of that. Sometimes I'll steal some bites of his ribeye. I'm still getting to the point where I'm enjoying like the chewier fat or more connective tissue kind of meat. But yeah, some semblance of that. And I'll eat that cold in the morning. I'll usually have leftovers from that small dinner at night. So yeah, about like 2.5, 3 meals a day of pretty much just meat. I notice if I do eggs too consistently, I have a little bit of a histamine response. So in that case, I'll just take the white out and do the yolks. I'll do as much butter as it sounds good to me. We'll cook in tallow or pork fat. Um, I'll do pork panko, like breaded chicken tenders if I'm feeling like I want something like more exciting that feels like an actual chicken tender. But yeah, it's pretty much meat, meat, meat.
Yeah, the pork pinko for chicken tenders is flat out, I would have to say, my favorite carnivore meal, fried in tallow and butter mixed together. I mean,
Yes. Oh,
it
I
just
haven't
doesn't
tried that yet.
it just doesn't get any better than that. Like, and
Okay.
actually, the truth is I tend to overeat that. It's like I want more, more, more. Yeah, and I don't know if it's because it's a reminder of a junk food, like if it's because it's a replacement
Yeah.
food. It could be that, but oh my gosh. That is my
I'll have
favorite
to try
meal.
that. I've only breaded them and done them in the air fryer, so I haven't even tried the fried with fat.
You can still do them in the air fryer. This is how I do it. So, I like to cook them in the oven. My oven is an air fryer or in my smaller air fryer, depending on how many I'm making. And I was frying them like in the beef towel in the butter, but it makes such a mess, right? It splatters everywhere, it makes a mess. So what I do now is when I make my egg mixture, I get the eggs kind of to room temperature first, but I just put them in some warm water. And I melt some butter and some tallow like in the microwave and then let it cool, but not harden. And once it's cooled off, I pour that into my eggs and scramble the eggs so that the fat is already mixed in with the eggs, and then it becomes part of the breading. And it
Okay.
makes them taste like they were fried in the butter and the tallow because you still have that flavor without the mess. That's how I cook mine.
Oh, that sounds so good. And the other one I want to try of yours is the carnivore pizza. I have done a version of that, but not nearly as delicious as yours looked. I just did it like a ground chicken with some
Yeah.
pork panko mixed in and like baked it and then the toppings, but yours looks very good.
Well, thank you. But I have heard the chicken one is very good too, but I have not tried that one. So we'll have to try each other's and let each
Yes.
other know how. So let's talk for a minute about exercise because we haven't talked about that yet. So you do some personal training. You have done personal training in the past. You teach Pilates. So what do you tell somebody who is a carnivore or on an extremely low carb diet? What kind of macros do you recommend? I know you said Casey sometimes gets onto you that maybe you're eating a little bit too much protein. What do you recommend for people?
I mean, I really like to not go into it. So if I'm starting to work with someone, I try to just go more behavior based than like the nitty gritty of numbers at first, just because we're trying to just change meals and an overall lifestyle. And I feel like they get too stressed out and in their heads if they're over or under on any fat, protein, or carbohydrate. So I try my best to give them the guideline of just making your plate, a palm sized or fist size of meat, at least some kind of protein. And then you're getting a fat in that's making up the other portion of the plate. And then at the very beginning, if they still feel like their heart is tied to needing the vegetables or needing, fruit, whatever their choice of carbohydrate is that we're going to wean away from, to just make that the very last thing and try to get full on the other two. Most of my women, I tell them to eat till satiation. I think your body, when you're really intuitive and in touch with it, will tell you when you've had enough and when you are full. So especially if you're expending in strength training, I think all of that needs to change depending on cycles because our hormones obviously are fluctuating over 28 days versus men who are 24 hours. So if they're lifting heavy, if they are doing any type of cardio, anything that's like strenuous and calorie burning, I definitely want them to be doing probably a little bit more fat. But I think a good general rule of thumb is at least your body weight in grams of protein, or aiming to get that.
Yeah, and that people feel like that is so much protein, but that's only because we're told to eat so many carbohydrates, and so that's what I tell
Right.
people. Yeah, like if you eat the protein first, make sure you like protein, should be your target. If you can get all that protein in, you're not even going to want the carbohydrates.
Right, right. It's so different when it's coming from not a protein shake, but an actual animal source.
Right.
So I mean, I wish I had that problem. I easily eat my body weight in protein plus more every single day. So if
Amazing.
anything, I have to personally rein that in a little bit. But yeah, it's a struggle for people at first, especially
Yeah.
again, my female clients. There's just such an aversion to wanting to do that. It must be just past conditioning,
Yes.
but
That's what I think too, and we think that we're not supposed to be full. Most women feel like if you're full, you've overdone it, you've been gluttonous, you're gonna gain weight, you're gonna get fat. Like
mhm.
that's what women think. And so women eat a small salad with some chicken breast at a restaurant and they get up and they tell themselves that that's enough and they shouldn't eat again for the rest of the day. And it's just done such damage to people,
Yeah.
way of thinking and the low fat movement and the don't eat any red meat and don't eat as much eggs and stay away from the butter. Like it has just done such damage to people.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and I mean, I believe that kind of stuff for years, so I definitely empathize with where
yeah.
they're coming from. But I tell everybody, if you're sick, if you're in pain, if you're wanting to lose weight, if you're struggling, what do you have to lose besides trying this for a month? Worst case, you hate it, you can't
That's
do it, it's not sustainable, go back to doing what you're doing. And if people can really give it a solid month try, I don't think anybody goes back.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I've heard maybe 3 people in the last 3 years and 3 months that just kind of gave up on carnivore. And it wasn't even because they were having health issues. They just
Mhm.
like, I think they didn't give it long enough to get attached to
Mhm.
it to
Mhm.
get the benefits to feel like that's the thing they should do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people too, and just in having conversations with them, is they feel like they are going to get sick of the same. I've never found that I wanted less variety than when I've been carnivore.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And the truth is, we all eat the same things every day anyway. So anybody who
Mhm.
says, "Oh, your diet must be so boring." You eat the same cereal every day. You eat the same, probably sandwich for lunch and the same fast food for dinner or the same
Yeah.
meal for dinner several times a week. Like people eat the same things over and over again anyway. So that's a really unfair assessment of carnivore.
Mhm.
I feel like I actually have more options now than I
Yeah.
used to because then I was always avoiding things. I was always avoiding things that had a lot of fat in them or things that had a lot of calories in them, or I was always avoiding things. And so now, as long as everything fits into the carnivore box, I just eat it. Like it,
Mhm.
I don't feel like I'm avoiding anything. It just makes it easier, really.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So, do you have any book recommendations for people
Ooh, as far as carnivore goes, or just in
or health?
general?
Yeah, just in general, health
Ah,
mindset.
well, what's propping up my phone right now to record this are my nerd books. So I think the biggest one that pertains to my work, that's not a beach read by any means, Anatomy Trains. I don't know if you're familiar with
I'm
that.
not.
That's kind of what my structural integration and body work is kind of based off of. So we have a huge misunderstanding of how the body is put together. And I've been lucky enough to actually go to Boulder, Colorado with Anatomy Trains 2 years in a row to do a week-long cadaver dissection because I learned about all of these body mechanics and human movement and anatomy in my exercise science degree. I've taught people the things I've regurgitated that I was taught, and it was one thing to learn it in a textbook, but I needed to confirm it by seeing it and touching it and feeling and seeing from the inside of the body. So these bodies were actually donated from the University of Utah donor program. And instead of ever being preserved with any formaldehyde or any chemicals, they were just frozen. So over the week, you're going from skin to bones and everything in between, and you're getting a really like lifelike hands-on experience to see fascia, to see tendons and ligaments and blood vessels and veins and muscle and the whole structure of the body. And it's really, really amazing. There are 7 different anatomy trains or myofascial slings. For example, the spiral line that connects the one shoulder to the opposite hip. We are just a series of different like infinity symbols, if you will, of different tensegrity inside of our body. One thing pulls on another. And my go-to tagline is the victims do the crying out, never the criminals. So where someone's experiencing the pain is rarely ever where the root of the problem is happening. Leave it up to Western medicine. They're going to treat the symptom, right? With pain medications or injections or surgeries. And what I usually find with my work is if someone can push that away for a little while and do some tissue work based on what I know from this book, the knee pain they were having is actually resolved by releasing the opposite side forearm or opposite side bicep or shoulder. So it's cool to be able to kind of change people's minds or give them a different perspective of our bodies are so capable of healing when given the right environment, given the right nutrition, and when we stay out of our own way, it really is capable of healing on its own. We just intervene way too quickly and we don't listen quickly enough. So
Yeah.
anatomy trains would be a big one.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look that one up. That might be something that I
Yeah.
might need to read for sure.
It's great. It's one of those where you'll probably read the same paragraph about 16 times and you're like, what exactly is going on here? But
Yeah.
the visuals inside, there are a lot of different photos from cadaver dissections where you can see different slings or the different trains. I'll actually be featured in the newest edition that's coming out this next year.
Neat.
But it's an amazing, amazing book. Todd Garcia and Tom Myers are largely to thank for that work. But yeah, it's always getting better. Fascia was something that was discarded with
Mhm.
dissection up until about 20 years ago. They thought it was just stuff that was in the way of what they were trying to get to.
Mhm.
So sadly, it's relatively new, but it's the innervated system of our body. It's responsible for structure and intelligence.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would highly recommend reading that one.
I'm a little bit squeamish. Are the pictures going to bother me?
I mean, could you look at beef jerky?
Yeah.
It looks like that kind of when it's dried out. Yeah.
Okay.
So no, there's nothing too gory in it at all.
Okay.
Maybe we want to wait a little while before you go to a cadaver dissection yourself, but it's not too
Probably.
bad in the book. I
Awesome.
know the biggest fear that I had with that, I told Casey, I'm afraid I'm going to come back and want to be a vegan. I'm
Oh
afraid when I
gosh.
see the inside of the body that I won't be able to continue eating meat, but no problem.
That's awesome. Okay, so if you had one piece of advice for people, what would it be?
As far as body movement stuff goes,
Yeah, or food, or like just to be better, just to be healthier.
I mean, lean into eating meat and motion is lotion. I think as soon as we stop moving, we lose a lot of range of motion, mobility. I think our body responds. We were hardwired and designed from down to a DNA perspective to move regularly. And I think from the time that we are little to when we start walking to when we're old, we need to keep moving, keep doing the things that we love. And that keeps, I think, our brain and our body working optimally.
Awesome advice. Thank you, Bethany, so much for being with me today. This was long overdue.
Yes, it was. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun and hopefully just part one.
Yes, absolutely. We will definitely have to do it again.
Thank you so much, Serena.
And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time on the Carnivore Revolution.